My presentation started out of a conversation that I had with Mr. Miller. He's the head of J5. This quote here encapsulates how he sees things. He thinks that we need to focus ourselves on the future, but in a way where we're looking at ourselves in the way that we aren't today, i.e. being something completely different, because tomorrow is going to be completely different. And so in my presentation, I want to talk about what we see on the operational horizon, and then look at human talent that we would need to help posture SOF better. First, though, I want us to just take a moment and look at these core activities of special operations. And I know you all know them, but I want you to look at them because a lot of the times people just focus on direct action and counterterrorism, as if this is the only thing that SOF does. And so just please take a look to see it is not just that, it's civil affairs, it's foreign internal defense, it's many things. And so as I talk to the problems that we're going to see on the horizon and the talent that we need, it's the talent to posture for all of these things. So the presentation starts out with operational horizon, talent needed, and then looking at different technologies that we can use, and then concluding with mindset. To me, mindset is the most important thing. So starting with the operational horizon, I will talk about these 4 elements. In new spaces, we see more subterranean battle. We're going to see that even more in the future. This is something that's already proliferating in the CENTCOM AOR, and we can anticipate more of that to come. What that means is that we're going to need better technology that our operators can use in this environment. Another space is the digital terrain. Augmented reality is very much being developed right now. When we have smart cities, we're going to see more of it, and virtual reality is another digital terrain I want to bring up because this has implications for what does that mean for SOF when they do direct action virtual space, or psychological operations, or civil affairs in digital space. This is something that I don't hear talked about as often, but if our people are physically, geographically in one location, but mentally and emotionally in the digital space, then that's an area where we need to think about. Surveillance states is something that is already here. The technology that surveillance states use is proliferating to other countries. And what that means is that our operators are going to be challenged by this. I want to bring up a company called Clearview AI. The New York Times did an op-ed on them, an extremely interesting article. Basically, what their company has done is that they have scraped the entire internet, basically, all of Facebook and social media, and they've taken all the pictures that they could possibly gather. They've created a database of that, and with artificial intelligence, they have used that to find any person that you have a picture of. They have sold this technology to law enforcement agencies, which have used that with stills that they've had from CCTV, where they couldn't find who the person was, for example, who stole something. And then they put that into this program, which can even be in an app. And within seconds, less than a minute, they can find that person. Obviously, that person needs to be somewhere photographed on the internet. This is something that means that our operators may not operate secretly. If they are walking in the street and CCTV is around, they may potentially be identified. And you may say, well, they're not on social media. That may be true, but it doesn't mean that their family photos on Thanksgiving aren't shared with other family members. So we need to think about a future where people can be identified more easily. And this may be one example of one company, but the way that they've approached it is a way that other companies can approach it too. And eventually I imagine that this is going to be something that we can use on a web browser and not something that we're going to have to pay for. Another technology that I see on the horizon as disruptive is satellite internet. Elon Musk and Facebook are hoping to cover the entire globe with internet. And that is a wonderful idea. It's going to help a lot of people have access to the internet. But what that means is that it's also going to have an asymmetric component to that for people who are going to use that to disseminate ideology, to organize, whether it's cyber attacks or recruit people for mass mobilization, among other things. This is something that we need to think about. The next thing on the horizon is the 4th Industrial Revolution. We have 1 foot inside the 3rd Industrial Revolution and 1 foot inside the 4th Industrial Revolution. What the 4th Industrial Revolution is basically artificial intelligence changing our lives. Andrew Ng, who's a very famous AI scientist, had compared AI to electricity. And I think that's a fabulous analogy. Basically, if you can imagine 100 years ago, your kettle became electrified and your fridge became electrified. The fridge just before worked with like ice. So if you can think about that, how everything became electrified in your kitchen, then imagine everything becoming cognified. Today, there's so many things that we can't even imagine it not being electrified using electricity. But as we proceeded to deeper into the fourth industrial revolution, we won't be able to function as efficiently without artificial intelligence. Just the same way as before, it was a game changer for nations who had electricity. It improved their productivity, it improved their economic prosperity. Another reason why you'll see big nations all over the world scrambling, trying to get as many AI resources as possible, and trying to put a strategy forward. On the horizon, we have climate changes. The Arctic is something I would like to highlight. There are environmental implications, which I will not talk about. However, from a political and economic perspective, this is a tremendous opportunity. The melting of the Arctic means that we're going to have a seaway that is faster and safer compared to the other seaways to transfer goods. This has tremendous potential for economic prosperity for the US. And also with that, it brings military concerns around this being another line of defense. So what does that mean for operators? They need to be prepared for that, not just physically, but also with technology that can withstand that type of environment, that type of climate. I'd like to bring up this report. If you haven't seen it or haven't read it, it is amazing, very well written. It's by the Army War College. It is about the climate change implications for the Army. I've pulled out 3 points here, straight from the report that I think are directly relevant for SOF that I think we need to keep in mind. One of the things is hydration challenges, and I'm going to be showing you a map in a bit about that. And then lack of adequate preparation in terms of training and capabilities development for effective operations in the Arctic, something we just saw. And then how we need to think about our campaign plans looking ahead around how climate affects them. I've listed here some SOF activities that I think climate will have an impact on. So foreign humanitarian assistance, civil affairs, security force assistance, unconventional warfare, and direct action all will be impacted by climate change. So this food security map, when you see the darker red colors, that is where they are hunger and climate most vulnerable on the index. And then when you see the little people, the biggest ones are the ones that have a larger percentage of their population that is hungry and malnourished. If you take a moment to notice the darkest red ones and look at, oops, I don't know where my laser is, but if you look at the Sahel, in Niger and Mali, in that area, it is dark, dark, dark red. It is these areas that you'll see food insecurity and climate change and conflict. And the reason I want to highlight Sahel is because right now, that is the new front line for extremism. It is rampant right now, and they are finding freedom of maneuver in that environment, in that chaos. And so climate change definitely contributes to conflict, and this is where our operators, we can foresee them having to play a role as well. So sometimes you can't necessarily predict the future, but there's a lot of things that you can anticipate because of causal effects. This is another map. This one is about water scarcity. It comes hand in hand with food security. Again, you're going to see the areas that are very contentious in Africa having those problems. I want to also now talk about durable disorder. Has anyone heard that term before? It's a term that's used now more often to refer to an era where the rules-based order is in decline, where multilateralism is no longer something people believe in, loss of trust in governance, and how in this kind of environment there's a bit of disorder, but the ideal aspiration in this chaos is to have a durable disorder. I'm going to play a video by the Director of Disarmament Affairs at the UN, who talks about this in terms of what she's doing.
The international community continues to be virtually united in the need to preserve the rules-based international order. Yet, multilateral security governance frameworks are increasingly under strain. Arms control agreements are being violated and abandoned. norms against the use of weapons of mass destruction have been defied so far with impunity. The toll of armed conflict on civilians has remained unacceptable and continues to be a driver of humanitarian emergencies, migration crisis, and underdevelopment.
She was talking about how countries are not respecting any more disarmament agreements that they had come to, that weapons are being proliferated in ways that had not been agreed upon in the international community. And when we talk about rules-based order in decline, this also means the things that had been won after the two world wars, which are state sovereignty, human rights. But state sovereignty is one I really want to focus on because we can already see parts of countries that have been annexed illegally and not just in one country, in other countries as well. So these are things that we want to keep an eye on because that creates extra conflict. Proxies and surrogates are something that are coming out of this environment because this is also an environment where conflict is happening below the threshold of warfare. And so one way that nation states try to escalate is through proxies. And then technology is helping super empowered individuals with asymmetric tools that they can use, whether it's cyber attacks or asymmetric threats like additive manufacturing that can be used for the purposes of creating arms. This is something in the military that has been considered, this environment, and General Perkins, who's now retired, came up with the multi-domain battle concept. For those who are not familiar with it, basically he says that we should anticipate being contested in all domains at all times, and that instead of thinking that we're going to have a domain where we're going to have freedom of maneuver, we should look for windows of advantages. Has anyone heard of the Global Trends report by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence? This is an incredible report. It is truly first class. It's done every 4 years around election year, and it is something that looks to the next 4 years, the next 10 years, about what kind of trends to expect. This one was published in 2017, January 2017, and the next one's coming out January 21st. I really recommend it, and I'm going to just pull out from this report. This is by no means a comprehensive point from it, but it's relating to the changing character of war, which is something we need to consider. They anticipate that we're going to be seeing that the peacetime and wartime will be blurred, and that civilians will also be targets. Civilians are non-combatants according to the law of armed conflict, but they predict that civilians are going to be more and more of a target. They also think that terrorist groups will be more capable than before because of technology and that being democratized, where they have commercial off-the-shelf tools that they can use. And that warfare will start to become more of a standoff and remote operations environment. And we can see that with the investments in unmanned vehicles, whether it's in air or underwater. So the multi-domain battle concept, I just put that up there in case people haven't seen it. I'm bringing up the Marsoft 2030 vision for the future. I really recommend reading it. If you're asking why I didn't include the other services, I wasn't able to find them online. This one is available online. It is a very accessible read if you want to see how the Marine Corps sees the 2030 future. And lastly, I think it's hard not to mention pandemics. This is something that we need to consider as time goes on and we're living in more dense urban environments and people are moving more and more into cities. Viruses can spread faster, and what does that exactly mean for our operators as well? So, what I propose is that such an environment requires some moonshots. And here's some, not a comprehensive list, but here's some ideas that I thought of, some moonshots that we should aspire to. One is make operators invisible. With moonshots, you could pick whatever you want. There's no limitation. No one holds you back. So, my moonshot is try and make operators invisible. I don't have the capability to do that, but it's my idea that it should happen. Boost cognitive learning by 100%. Allow operators to communicate with each other with their thoughts, and you would understand what I said. And halt and reverse operators from aging. I think these are good moonshots for some of the operational horizon items I mentioned. And I will get back to them at the end of the presentation. So, another soft truth. Most special operations require non-soft assistance. And that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the talent that we need to deal and posture ourselves in the environment that I described above. So nanotechnology, biotechnology, cyber, robotics, electromagnetic spectrum capabilities, additive manufacturing, neurotechnologies. These are just some technologies that are going to be very useful to give us that advantage and to give our operators that advantage. So, where is that talent? A lot of that talent is in our national labs, which is great. And a lot of that talent is also in the civilian world. I want to talk about some demographic trends. One of the things, I don't know if you're aware of, is that we are increasingly becoming an aging nation. What that means is that fewer babies are being born. So we can anticipate that if fewer babies are being born, we're going to have fewer people. And as fewer babies are being born, our longevity is also improving, which is a good thing, which means that older people are around longer. But what does that mean for the labor market? New, young talent is going to be more competitive because it's going to be fewer. And in terms of older talent, it's going to be harder to retain them. But we should try to think about how it is we can retain all that amazing talent of people who are older and looking to retire. There are all kinds of combinations of ways that we can do that, and I will get to that in a bit. Another thing is global talent, great talent competition, total pun on great power competition. And the way that I see it is that as I look at the labor market, the trends that we're seeing is that people want freedom of maneuver. People want to be able to change jobs. They want to be able to work from home. They want to be able to do like part-time or 25% of the time or 70% of the time. The private sector, in the civilian world, they are trying to accommodate to this and creating new kinds of ways of work. The military and the government isn't doing that at the speed that's needed. And so that's something that we need to consider. And with the gig economy started around 2008 when we had the economic crisis, and people started getting different jobs here and there, but then people started to, that trend continued even after the economy got better, and this could be because people enjoy that flexibility, but this is an important trend to consider. Now, as we look to the talent that it is that we need to posture ourselves looking forward, yes, we're going to have a lot of it in our national labs, but there's going to be some of it that isn't there. And that is going to be mostly in the dual-use technology space. I bring up what happened at Google when there were some protests around Google's participation or the program that they had with the Pentagon regarding drone target striking. And the problem with that is that it wasn't just a few employees that complained, it was thousands who signed that protest petition. And what that means is that there are some people who do not want to help the military, and they have the talent that is needed. And so we need to think about that as we look ahead. Luckily, there's some people like Jeff Bezos who put his entire company behind us and said that he wants to support the US military. And so as we look to the future and think about these things, how is it that we can have people instead of organizations? Individuals who can make a difference instead of an organization. Because while there could have been thousands of employees at Google who signed against that petition, it doesn't mean that there weren't a few hundred that wanted to help, or it doesn't mean that there was 5 key people who could have made a difference that wanted to help. So this is not the first time that such a conundrum was thought of and debated. Admiral Rogers, when he was the head of Cybercom and NSA, he said, what if we could have people from the NSA leave the NSA, go to the civilian world, get a job there, stay there for 2 years, and then come back into the NSA and bring their ideas in. And this is one idea.
3 years, 36 months. And that branch today, the soldiers underneath Paul Nakasone, there's 19,000 of them, almost 20, and we don't know how big this is going to get. I suspect it's going to get a lot bigger. But right now today, 20,000 or so soldiers in Army Cyber. We got 41 cyber protection teams in their active component, another 21 in the reserve component. So this has exploded. Maybe that's, probably too strong a word. It's expanded. It's expanded significantly in a very, very short amount of time. We are placing a lot of emphasis on it. Let me mention talent management, by the way. So in talent, I'll use officers as an example. There is a massive amount of incredible talent in the United States right now in the world of information technology. Silicon Valley, Chicago, up at the 128 area of Boston, down in the Research Triangle of Carolinas and many, many other places. There's all kinds of incubators and hubs and all this kind of stuff. And there's really some brilliant minds. It's just that they may or may not be in our military. So what we need to do, we the military, we the Army, we need to attract those best minds. Because I would argue that the vast majority of them are great American patriots, want to see a better country for them and their children and grandchildren, and they would love an opportunity to serve. But we may not have reached out to them. So rather than maybe bring someone in at private and then in a linear industrial model of promotion that has been around for 100, 150 years, why not bring them in laterally? Ash Carter tried doing that. So we're doing that in the Officer Corps in the Army. We have now instituted a pilot program to do direct commissioning, which is typically only reserved for doctors, some lawyers, and some other specialties. So we are direct commissioning. We did a lot of that in World War II. Like the OSS, the Office of Strategic Service, the predecessor to the CIA. Tons of those guys were direct commissions. A lot of these guys just came right in out of the commercial world, and they did all kinds of things for the military and the war effort in World War II. There's no reason at all, if you got a brilliant person out there, or someone who really wants to serve, and call him 35 years old or whatever, and the guy created 2 startups, and now he makes cars that don't run on gasoline, and he wants to get buried on Mars. Guys like that, right? Like Musk there, and all that. So there's some bona fide brilliant dudes out there. We ought to try to get them, even if it's only for 24 months, 36 months. Let them serve this country. Let them serve the flag. Let them do some good for us. And they'll feel good. We'll feel good. And then they're so rich, we won't even have to pay them. So it'll be good. We just give them a uniform. They're all into it. So it'll be good. It'll be good. So we are doing that in a pilot way, okay? So talent management is a big deal, and we're trying to do that. I see.
Chairman, it's also kind of funny. So they did launch this pilot program, and I don't know the results. It's still ongoing, as this was still maybe 30 months ago or something like that. But what he's talking about is bringing people into the Army full-time in uniform. My proposal is about bringing people, civilians, into the military temporarily. I think 24 months is far too long, considering the dynamic way that the labor market works, particularly in high-end technology expertise. So that brings me to another soft truth. Quality is better than quantity. But you know what happens when you're given 2 options? You know what you're supposed to do? You're supposed to take both. So what if you could have both? Right now in the civilian business world, something that's really popular is the direct-to-consumer business model. It's getting rid of all the in-between, cutting costs, so it's cheaper for the consumer and it's more profit for the business. What if we were to take this model and we were to apply it to talent, and we were to have a command-to-talent recruitment model? So the idea then would be where we could rapidly resource people that were needed for particular projects, but do so in a modular way. Right now, a lot of the labor force is networked, it's modular, it's distributed. There are companies that are being created that are entirely dispersed and distributed. And so what if some of those elements from the civilian world, those forward-leaning, edge-leaning kind of concepts could be pulled in to SOF to try and find ways that we can use new technologies and bring new creative ideas and innovation for our new operational environment that's coming about. I say modular because I don't mean bringing someone in 100% of the time. I mean bringing them in for one project, and that would mean that they would be doing that project 25% of their time. Many of us already do many projects in our current roles. So why can't we think about that when we want to leverage talent that's outside, just to leverage their expertise for a particular problem set to collaborate? So it could be, so to speak, a crowdsourced labor market to supplement our SOF enterprise. And again, I'm talking about civilian talent to help support the initiatives that we have around technology and posturing our operators for the future. And then the thing is that we have a lot of technologies, which is something I wanted to bring up right now. Technologies that are coming about allow us to bring in different talent in different ways without removing them from their life. And I'm going to show some examples. One of them is called Spatial Computing and Co-Presence. And what that is it is augmented reality where you can share ideas in real time together and work as if they were right by you. And I'm going to show you a video so it makes sense with different use cases. So this is not just for people who are on the leading edge of their technologies. This kind of way of hiring people could also be used for operators who have retired, but they can contribute to projects that exist right now because they understand the problem sets, they've been there. And then also for civilians who have retired out and they're taking all of that expertise and talent with them, but they could come in, so to speak, virtually and contribute. But we need that type of recruitment model and acquisition of people model that we can bring them in and weave them in and out as needed. And that is bureaucratically very disruptive. Another example is full body surrogacy for collaborative communication. That's a mouthful. That's something that I learned about last year at the AI for Good Global Summit. What I am wearing is a technology made by researchers in a university in Japan. And it's basically kind of a backpack. And when you put it on, you'll see that I have gained 2 robotic arms to myself. And then on my shoulder, I have a video it's a camera that is projecting video to the person who's sitting down that you can see there on the right side. And she's wearing a virtual reality headset where she can see what it is, like what I'm looking at or where I'm moving around. Now, this has several use cases. So, for example, if I was sitting down and somebody else was on the other side of the nation, I could be trying to put something together and someone could be helping me out and showing me like this goes here, this goes there, etc. Or it could also be used for physical therapy. I'll just play it real quick so you can see it.
Incredible work. Thank you.
Here, hit me down. There we go. Grab my hand.
He's stealing you.
These right now, you see it with the hands and the fingers, but there's another version of it where it just kind of has a band that connects to the wrists. And this can be used for remote physical therapy. So you could have your physical therapist be somewhere else, and you put the machine on, and that physical therapist is helping you move around. This is something that could be used for physical therapy for operators. Great tool, another way to bring different talent in a modular way. So up to now, I've talked about different ways that we can bring different technologists and experts to contribute to technological advancement. This example is different because this is a way that we can bring civilian, commercial off-the-shelf expertise that can be used in asymmetric, unconventional warfare environments, and they would be part of the kill chain. This is a very different way of recruitment, and I will get to some of the implications of that in a bit. So in this example, we have human pilots that are drone racers. They are experts in drone racing, commercial off-the-shelf drones. And this could potentially be useful in a scenario in a dense urban environment where you would need to do either special reconnaissance or unconventional warfare or another foreign humanitarian assistance. And military drones may not be the most suitable for this environment, and so there could be a use case for having this type of expertise to come in and help out.
6 pilots engaged. Mid-air! Double mid-air!
Are you ready for carnage?
This is an example of a type of skill set that you wouldn't want to bring full-time because that skill set is furthered and maintained and improved on when it's not in the military, when it's outside. So these are people who compete professionally with commercial off-the-shelf drones. And so there could be a use case of potentially needing them in certain environments that will exist in the future. If they're part of the kill chain, what does that mean for them psychologically? How will they respond to having been part of this? And he started to think about, and I'll let him share some more of his insights on that, but he started to think about what would POTUS's role be if we had somebody who was a civilian commercial off-the-shelf drone pilot who was pulled in for a special operation. Even if that person wasn't pulling the trigger and you had a uniformed officer pulling the trigger and this was all done remote, still there would be some implications for POTUS, and he will speak a little bit to that after my talk. So these are some things to consider when bringing people in that are involved in the kill chain, but there is precedent. Contractors who do targeting are part of the kill chain, so this is not a completely new idea that a civilian would somehow contribute. Another idea is that with new technologies that we have, there is also an opportunity for spouses to be part of the fight should they want to be. There are 2 use cases that I can think of. One of them is labeling sensitive data for artificial intelligence use, and that sensitive data would be data that would be brought in from the enterprise. It could be from special reconnaissance, etc. And then another use case is graphic design for 3D printing. And 3D printing in the context of rapid prototyping that could be needed by operators. And being so close to operators, they may be getting new ideas and conversations about certain types of things that they would like to see to try to test out. And what that would involve would be training, and this training could continue across 3D stations because this is the type of training that could be done remotely, online. And another thing is that this is a type of skill that could be used in the civilian world as well. Labeling of AI data and graphic design in terms of 3D printing is a very useful skill set. So this is one idea where there's talent that could be used in this process. So I'm going to conclude with mindset. I think that mindset is the most important thing. We can do so much. I don't think there's a problem we can't conquer. I think that it's about how we perceive that problem that matters. So having an abundance mindset is important. And an abundance mindset is thinking that you have an abundance of options, of resources. We don't. We don't technically have an abundance of resources. But if we thought that we could use spouses, if we thought we could use the civilian drone pilots, if we thought that we could use people in a modular way that are working in different commercial labs across the nation, then all of a sudden we have increased our human capital enormously. So it's about thinking that there's more that we can be doing, so having an abundance mindset. Another thing is having technological situational awareness. There are so many new technologies that are coming about. Keeping up is really difficult, trust me, I know. And I'm just still trying to understand all the time, what does it mean? What are the bounds of the possibility? What is the art of possibility? And looking from the civilian sector, you can see a lot of new ideas, which is why I brought some of those videos in so that we can visualize some of the different things that can be done. And then another thing is clarity and vision. Strategy, strategy, strategy. So I'm not just saying this because I work at the J5 and strategy is super important there, But if you don't have a vision, a strategic place where it is you want to reach, then you can't allocate and manage your resources appropriately. So back to the moonshots. I mentioned some moonshots. So make operators invisible. What I meant was not that you would stand in front of them and you couldn't see them, like a Harry Potter cloak, although I know that there's some people who are trying to work on that. But what I meant by that is if we're going to be operating in surveillance states, if there's going to be Wi-Fi everywhere, if asymmetric cyber capabilities are going to proliferate, then what does that mean for the digital signatures, the electronic signatures that operators will be emitting? And so what I mean by that is how can we make SOF invisible in the electromagnetic spectrum? Boost cognitive learning by 100%. So there's something called transcranial direct current stimulation, and it's basically where you put some electricity into your brain, and presumably what that does is it induces your brain into hyperplasticity, where you are able to learn things faster and retain more things at once in a shorter period of time. There are companies, loads of new companies now that are selling this kind of technology. It is still not clear what kind of adverse effects it could have in the long term, but right now it seems that they have been able to demonstrate between 30 and 70% cognitive learning improvement. And that is a space to watch. Another one I mentioned was allow operators to communicate with each other with their thoughts. So that's actually something that's being developed, and there is progress on that. At MIT, they were able to transmit thoughts to each other in an experiment that they did. The experiment that I saw conducted was, I didn't see it in person, but I read about it. It was 3 people, and they were separated, and they had a kind of pad that was measuring the waves that they were emitting. And another person was in another room, and they had like a Tetris-like game, and that person who was alone in the room didn't know couldn't fully see the game. And so the piece was coming down, but they couldn't fully see it. And then in the other room, the 2 people could see it, and so they had to communicate with their brain to the person whether to move that piece left or right, because they could see everything. And they successfully were able to do so. So this is still very much in the early stage, but the proof of concept is there. Elon Musk has something else that he's been working on. It's called Neuralink, that's his company. And what he wants to do is he wants to have a minimally invasive chip in your brain. Minimally invasive still means drilling inside your skull. Just want to make that clear. It's still tiny, but it's still there. And so the big news that he announced the other week was that he expects to be able to try it in a human for the first time at the end of this year. And what that is that a way to communicate with machines. And if you can communicate with machines, you can also communicate with other people. And then the last moonshot that I brought up is halt and reverse operators from aging. The reason I thought this was a good moonshot is because if we're having fewer people who are being born, then maybe we can anticipate having potentially fewer SOF. So how is it that we can retain more of existing SOF? And there is an Australian scientist that works at Harvard, and he is working on trying to reverse aging and stop it altogether at a molecular cellular level. And so watch that space. And I will let our chairman have the last word.
Again, I and those my age do not have the answers. So anyone who thinks that someone who stands before them and has a bunch of stars on their shoulders has all these answers, we don't. All I know and all I'm encouraging people to do is to ask the questions, to put us on the path of learning here so that we can discover the answers, so that we can know the solutions as we go forward. Because, as I said up front, you have to get it, we have to get it less wrong than our opponents. Our opponents, our potential adversaries, are moving out very, very rapidly in directions similar to what I've described. We, the United States military, if we're going to preserve this experiment in freedom for the next generation and the generation after that, we too will have to move out smartly. And we can't move out alone. The military is only one entity within this experiment, if you will, going forward.